Buckingham Palace expected Princess and ended the emergency meeting study Queen Camilla's proposal and quietly give her approval. Instead, and read the final page, placed the document flat on the table, and delivered a refusal so firm that no one in the room dared interrupt her in that single moment. An emergency plan designed to expand Camilla's authority collapsed, and the balance of power inside the monarchy changed before. The palace doors had even reopened. Charles sat at the head of the table, knowing that everyone present understood why it mattered. His reduced workload had created a dangerous gap inside the royal household, meaning the network that manages official duty, staff schedules, and communication around the sovereign. Someone had to coordinate statements, appointments, and access to the king whenever he could not act personally. Camilla believed her proposal offered order and saw something threatening. The queen pushed the document forward and asked for approval of a temporary emergency arrangement. The plan would give her final control over palace operations, official communications, and senior family duties whenever Charles was unavailable. And did not hesitate. She removed her glasses, looked directly at Camilla, and said concern for the monarch could not be used to claim powers the crown had never granted. Camilla's confidence cracked. She had entered expecting resistance to wording, not rejection of the plan. Charles watched his wife absorb a blow, yet he also saw the certainty in his sister's face. He wanted to protect Camilla from humiliation, and had forced him to confront a darker possibility. The proposal did not simply fill a gap, it could reshape who controlled the monarchy during his weakest moments. An opener marked copy, several passages had been underlined, and one clause carried a double line in the margin. That clause would allow Camilla's office to delay, revise, or block messages before they reached William and other senior royals. William, as heir, was not merely another family member. He was the future king, and restricting his access could create a rival center of authority within the palace. Charles quietly lowered his eyes. Camilla asked why and had arrived with a private draft no one expected her to possess. The princess pushed the unsigned pages back across the table and refused to explain. Her silence landed harder than any accusation. Someone within the palace had broken ranks, and the rejected proposal had already exposed a deeper breach of trust. Camilla then asked a question that changed the room, who had shown, and the draft. Charles remained seated at the head of the table, but the silence around him felt heavier than any public crisis. His reduced workload had left a dangerous gap in the daily running of the royal household, the system responsible for official schedules, senior staff public statements, and access to the sovereign. Someone had to coordinate urgent decisions whenever the king was unavailable. Camilla believed that responsibility should rest with her and believed the proposal went far beyond protection. Camilla pushed the emergency arrangement toward her sister-in-law and waited for a signature. The document would give the queen final authority over palace operations, official communications, and the duties of senior royals whenever Charles could not personally intervene. She expected questions. She may even have expected resistance, but she did not expect and to remove her glasses, hold her gaze, and declare that concern for the monarch could never justify powers the crown had not granted. Anne's words landed with brutal precision. She had spent decades serving without demanding greater status, and that history mattered because it gave her refusal moral force. The princess was not fighting for herself. She was warning that one private office could gain control over the flow of information at the very moment the monarchy was most vulnerable. Camilla's confidence began to crack. She looked toward Charles, expecting to defend the plan, but the king said nothing. He wanted to protect his wife from humiliation, yet he could also see the certainty in his sister's face, and was not reacting to a misunderstanding. She had arrived prepared, and opened her own marked copy, and turned to a clause underlined twice. The passage would allow Camilla's office to delay, revise, or block messages before they reached William and other senior royals. William was the heir, the person next in line to inherit the crown, and restricting his access could create two competing centers of authority inside the palace. Charles lowered his eyes. Camilla stared at the marked pages and asked how and had obtained a private draft before the meeting. The princess pushed the unsigned proposal back across the table and refused to answer. That silence exposed something even more dangerous than the document itself. Someone inside Buckingham Palace had broken ranks. Anne's refusal shocked the room, but the greater danger was not the rejected signature. It was the personal history that made her believe Camilla could never be trusted with that authority. To the outside world, the dispute looked like a disagreement over palace procedure inside the royal family. It was painfully personal. Camilla saw the proposal as protection for her husband and her position, and saw it as an attempt to move power away from the bloodline. Charles saw two women he trusted forcing him toward a choice he had spent years avoiding. Behind every carefully chosen sentence stood an older wound, and none of them prepared to admit how deeply it still hurt. Camilla returned to her private sitting room, carrying the humiliation with her. She removed a bracelet Charles had given her and placed it beside a cold cup of tea, then told a trusted aide that, and had not simply rejected a plan in her mind, the princess had rejected her legitimacy. The title of queen gave her rank beside the king, but the emergency proposal would have created an independent chain of command, meaning a line of authority, able to continue making decisions even when Charles stepped back, and reached her apartment angry. But the anger did not protect her from fear. She had built her life around duty without reward, accepting exhausting engagements and little public praise because she believed royal authority had to be earned through service. Now she had challenged Camilla openly, and that decision could isolate her from Charles. The princess knew her brother might view the refusal as disloyalty, yet remaining silent would have felt like a betrayal of William, Catherine, and the future stability of the crown. Charles remained trapped between them. He had not written a proposal, but he had allowed Camilla's office to develop it, and that permission made his silence inside the meeting impossible to dismiss. The king wanted to believe the plan was created out of care. He also knew and would never risk a family rupture over wording alone. Her refusal told him that she had seen something deeper, something he had failed to examine. Camilla insisted to her aide that the arrangement was meant to protect her husband from pressure, and saw a different danger. William had been excluded from the drafting process despite being heir to the throne, the person next in line to inherit the crown. That omission mattered because any emergency structure affecting royal authority should have included him from the beginning. Instead, the proposal placed the future king beneath decisions controlled by the Queen's office, and began reviewing earlier briefings, searching for the first sign that this pattern had already begun. One memory returned with painful clarity: a palace ceremony months earlier, a handwritten message intended for William, and an order that never reached him. The rejected proposal had exposed a conflict, but its true beginning lay months earlier during one ceremony, when a missing message changed everything. Long before and refused Camilla's emergency proposal, one carefully managed royal ceremony had already convinced her that something was wrong. A message from King Charles was withheld. William was left publicly unprepared. Camilla's private secretary stepped into confusion and issued instructions no one remembered the king approving. The ceremony continued. The cameras captured nothing unusual, and the palace called the disruption a misunderstanding, and had witnessed the exchange herself, and from that day forward she began keeping records. 3 months earlier, Charles entered a Commonwealth reception already fighting exhaustion. The event brought representatives from nations historically connected to the crown, and its order mattered because every speech, greeting, and public statement reflected who held authority inside the monarchy. Before the evening reached its midpoint, the king quietly withdrew and wrote a short instruction directing William to lead the remaining duties and approve any statement released afterward. Charles handed the note to a senior aide linked to Camilla's office. The monarch believed his order would reach his son. Within minutes, it never did. William waited for guidance while diplomats watched the schedule shift around him. Then Camilla's private secretary approached and informed the prince that the queen had assumed control of the remaining reception. He was told to remain in a supporting role. William understood the humiliation immediately, but he controlled his expression and completed the evening without protest, and noticed everything. She watched the order of precedence change, meaning the formal ranking that decides who leads speaks and stands first during royal duties. She also saw her nephew step back when he should have stepped forward. Later, the princess found William alone near the private staircase, furious, but determined not to create a public scandal. William admitted that no instruction from Charles had reached him and promised nothing, yet her suspicion hardened, and confronted the aide before leaving the palace. According to a documented account she later placed in her private records, the official admitted that the king's handwritten message had been held back because Camilla believed he had been too tired to make a binding decision. That explanation changed the meaning of the entire evening. Someone had not misunderstood Charles, someone had overruled him, and searched the discarded briefing folder and recovered a photocopy of the note. The instruction was dated, signed, and unmistakably clear. Months later, she placed that copied message beside Camilla's emergency proposal and saw the same phrase, in both documents, continuity of household authority. The word struck like a confession. The reception had not been an isolated mistake, it had been a rehearsal, armed with proof that the earlier incident had been no misunderstanding, and returned to Buckingham Palace, ready for a confrontation that could no longer remain polite. The second confrontation took place without secretary's advisors or carefully prepared minutes. Camilla closed the drawing room door herself and remained standing. Between them lay the copied note from the Commonwealth reception and the unsigned emergency proposal. What followed was not a discussion about palace administration. It was a battle over loyalty, legitimacy, and the future king. For the first time, it accused Camilla directly of using Charles's vulnerability to place herself between William and the crown. Camilla had requested the meeting after learning that evidence from the disruptive reception still existed. She wanted the dispute contained before William, or the wider royal household, the network of family members and staff who managed the monarchy's public and private work, could see the documents, and arrived carrying only a slim folder. She refused refreshments, declined the offered chair, and placed Charles's withheld instruction on the table. Camilla spoke first. She argued that the king needed protection from pressure, and that William had shown too much impatience with his father's physical limits. The Queen insisted the reception decision had been temporary, designed to prevent confusion during a difficult evening. She framed the emergency proposal as another act of care, not a grab for control. Anne's anger rose the moment William's readiness was questioned. She warned that protecting Charles did not mean weakening his heir. The line of succession, the legal order deciding who inherits the crown, could not be quietly replaced by authority built around marriage. Camilla might stand beside the monarch, but she could not place herself between the sovereign and the future king. Camilla stopped defending the wording and admitted the truth in a recorded account later preserved in Anne's private file. The Queen confirmed that she had personally approved the decision to withhold Charles's handwritten message during the reception. She still called it temporary, but the admission destroyed the claim that an aide had acted alone. And did not celebrate. She opened the folder, removed 2 copied pages, and told Camilla that William had already received them. One contained the rejected proposal, the other contained Charles's original instruction. The future king now knew that his father's order had been blocked and that a new plan could have placed his access under the Queen's control. Camilla pushed back her chair and stood. She warned that dragging William into the conflict would make Charles feel betrayed by his own sister. And closed the folder and held her gaze. Charles might forgive a painful truth, she said, but the monarchy would not survive a convenient lie. Camilla believed Charles's loyalty would protect her, and had shifted the struggle toward the one person whose authority could defeat the proposal permanently. William did not react with an outburst when Anne's documents reached him. He read every page twice, then he returned to a clause naming the Queen's office as the final channel for emergency communications, and drew a single line beneath it. The danger was now unmistakable. Camilla's proposal would not merely organize the household during Charles's absence. It could decide what the heir was told when he was told, and whether his instructions reached anyone at all. William understood the limits of his position. As heir, he stood next in line to inherit the crown, but he had no automatic power to overrule the reigning monarch. Any emergency system affecting succession duties, meaning the responsibilities connected to the future transfer of royal authority, still required his cooperation. Without it, the palace risked creating 2 competing centers of command. Anne's refusal changed everything. Charles trusted her judgment. Senior courtiers respected her experience, and no one could easily accuse the princess of chasing power for herself. Her opposition gave William something stronger than suspicion. It gave him proof that another senior royal had seen the same danger. William's anger sharpened when he found his name only once in the entire proposal. The single reference appeared in a paragraph requiring him to consult Camilla's office before taking on additional duties. He was not being treated as the future king. He was being placed beneath an office that could control when he acted and what information reached him. Catherine found him alone in his study, holding the copied note from the Commonwealth reception. She saw the hurt before he said a word. William admitted that losing authority for one evening had been humiliating, but the deeper wound was the possibility that Charles had known he was excluded and had chosen silence. Catherine reminded him that assumption was not proof the prince had to confront his father before resentment hardened into something permanent. A legal advisor later confirmed the importance of Anne's rejection in a documented briefing. Without her signature, the proposal could not be presented as a unified family agreement, and senior officials would refuse to implement it. Then came a second discovery: 2 household appointments had already been delayed, while Camilla's team waited for approval. The plan was influencing palace decisions before it had even been accepted. William made his choice. He would not confront Camilla first. He folded Charles's earlier handwritten note inside the unsigned proposal, creating one file that joined the past deception to the present threat. The conflict was no longer and against Camilla. It had become a father facing the evidence that his silence had placed his wife and his heir on opposing sides. Charles read the proposal in silence while William waited across from him. Then the king opened the folded note from the Commonwealth reception and recognized his own handwriting. His face changed. The room no longer contained an abstract argument between Camilla and it contained proof that his instruction had been stopped. His son had been undermined, and his failure to ask difficult questions had allowed the damage to spread. When Charles finally spoke, his decision struck Camilla harder than Anne's refusal ever could. William presented the documents without accusation. He told his father that the monarchy could not operate through private interpretations of the sovereign's wishes, meaning personal guesses about what the king wanted instead of direct confirmed instructions. That distinction mattered because one altered message could change an evening, but a repeated pattern could change who truly controlled the crown during moments of weakness. Charles examined the reception note again and confirmed that he had never authorized anyone to ignore it. He had believed William received the instruction exactly as written. The admission left the prince with relief and pain at once. His father had not deliberately pushed him aside, but the king had failed to notice that someone else had. Charles felt the guilt settle heavily. The emergency proposal had begun because he wanted Camilla to feel secure during periods of fatigue. He had allowed her office to develop the plan, trusting that it would protect the household, yet he had never studied the exact powers being requested. His silence had created space for authority to grow without clear limits. Camilla entered after being summoned and immediately sensed a decision had already been made. Charles told her the proposal was withdrawn with immediate effect. She remained composed until he added that her office would no longer control communications between him and William. That boundary cut deeper than the rejection itself because it showed the king no longer trusted the system built around her. Charles then ordered an internal review, a formal examination of withheld messages, altered schedules, and delayed appointments linked to the Queen's staff during the previous 6 months. One of Camilla's closest officials was removed from emergency planning duties. While the review continued, the consequences were no longer confined to one document. Camilla returned to her private rooms, removed her gloves one finger at a time, and heard the door close behind her. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she quietly asked whether Charles still trusted her and was waiting outside. The proposal had been defeated and Camilla's authority reduced, and now faced a harder choice whether victory required punishment or mercy. And could have walked away after winning. Camilla's proposal was dead. Her office had lost control, and Charles had ordered an investigation. Yet the princess remained outside Camilla's room because she understood something: the palace machinery could not measure humiliation, could make a wounded person more dangerous, but honest mercy could stop a family from shattering. With no aides present and no document between them, and offered Camilla a choice to fend the failed power grab or help rebuild the trust it had destroyed. And entered alone and made her purpose clear. She had not come on behalf of Charles, William, or Buckingham Palace. This conversation would remain between 2 women whose conflict had placed a family under unbearable strain. That mattered because official meetings could settle authority, but they could not heal fear, resentment, or the private wounds driving every decision. Camilla did not defend the proposal immediately. Instead, she admitted in a private, recorded conversation that had begun as an attempt to prevent chaos if the king became unavailable. The emergency council, meaning a small group created to make urgent royal decisions during a crisis, was supposed to protect continuity, but fear had changed the plan. The queen confessed that she had gradually turned it into a shield against being pushed aside. Camilla's voice weakened when she spoke about William. She feared that the moment he assumed greater responsibility, her place beside Charles would begin to disappear. and answer without cruelty, trying to control the air she wore, had made that fear more likely, not less. Trust could never survive where access was blocked and authority was hidden. And then faced her own failure. She admitted that years of family pain had shaped her judgment of Camilla long before the proposal appeared. The princess had entered the first meeting prepared for battle, not explanation. Her refusal had been necessary, but her anger had carried old wounds into a new crisis. Camilla accepted the terms. She agreed to surrender all authority over direct communication between Charles and William and support an emergency council where no single royal household could dominate, and promised to tell the king that the queen had accepted responsibility voluntarily, preventing the investigation from becoming a public purge of her entire staff. Camilla extended her hand and did not take it once. After a long pause, the princess accepted not as forgiveness, but as proof that both women had chosen to end the struggle. Before and left, Camilla asked whether William would ever trust her again. The answer was simple: trust would depend on what she did. When the palace doors opened the next morning, their private truce stopped the family conflict from exploding further. But outside Buckingham Palace, the story had already escaped, and the public was preparing its own verdict. By sunrise, the private confrontation had become a national spectacle. A newspaper front page showed a stark photograph of Princess, and beneath were enormous words she would not sign. Broadcasters described the refusal as the most serious internal challenge to Camilla's authority since she became queen. Outside Buckingham Palace, a small crowd gathered beneath the balcony, some applauding Anne's resolve, while others accused the family of humiliating Charles's wife during a vulnerable moment. The palace could no longer control the meaning of what had happened. Buckingham Palace released a brief statement confirming that the proposed emergency household arrangement had been withdrawn and replaced by a broader family council. That council meant a shared group of senior royals who would make urgent decisions together rather than allowing one office to control the response. The wording was calm, the reaction was not. Commentators divided sharply. Some called and the guardian of constitutional order, meaning the rules and limits that keep royal authority from becoming personal power. Others argued that Camilla had been trying to create stability, while Charles reduces workload. Every debate turned the crisis into a contest between loyalty and ambition. Charles watched the morning coverage in silence. He understood that the public was reducing three private fears to winners, and losers as declining strength, Camilla's fear becoming irrelevant, and William's concern that the future crown could be quietly controlled. The king had wanted protection for everyone. Instead, his silence had allowed each person to feel threatened by the others. Camilla paused before her first engagement. After the leak, an aide asked whether she wished to cancel. The queen straightened her coat and replied that retreat will allow the failed proposal to define her permanently. She knew one public sentence could either deepen the division or prove that the private truce with Anne was real. Camilla stepped forward at the engagement and thanked the princess for her unyielding devotion to the crown. The words were delivered openly and preserved in the official recording of the event. Reporters immediately recognized the message. The queen was not attacking, and she was acknowledging her. Hours later, William entered Buckingham Palace through the public-facing entrance instead of the private courtyard. Cameras captured the prince meeting, and with a warm embrace on the palace steps. A broadcaster paused over the live image and called at the moment the future of the crown answered the crisis without speaking. That single gesture changed the story and was no longer seen only as the woman who rejected Camilla. She had become the person who protected the bond between the reigning monarch and his heir. The public had chosen its symbol, but the final meaning of Anne's decision would be determined inside the family, where Charles still had one last judgment to deliver. The final meeting was smaller than the first. There was no emergency proposal, no line of waiting advisors, and no expectation that Anne would simply agree. Charles sat with Camilla, William, and his sister, and acknowledged the truth the crisis had forced them all to face. The monarchy could not protect itself through hidden authority, withheld messages, or fear the future. It could survive only when duty was strong enough to challenge power, and loyalty was honest enough to say no. Charles opened the revised agreement and read every limit aloud. The new royal council, a 4-person group, created to share urgent decisions during moments of crisis, would include the sovereign, the heir, and Camilla. No single office could delay messages, alter instructions, or control access to the king. That mattered because the crown could not remain stable if private loyalty became more powerful than clear authority. William listened closely as direct communication between him and his father was formally protected. The prince would no longer depend on another office to receive instructions central to the future monarchy. Camilla retained an important role, but it focused on Charles's personal welfare rather than command over the wider family. She accepted the change without protest, understanding that preserving her dignity required giving up the power fear had pushed her to seek. Charles turned to, and once the terms were settled in a private statement, later preserved in the meeting record, the king thanked his sister for refusing the original proposal. He admitted that her defiance had stopped him from approving powers he had never meant to surrender, and did not celebrate. She simply answered that protecting him also meant protecting the line between care and control. Camilla faced the truth at last, and had never opposed her merely because she was queen. The princess had opposed a structure capable of separating the monarch from his heir and turning private access into unchecked authority. That distinction allowed the queen consort to leave the crisis wounded but not destroyed. William, left with greater trust in Anne and a clearer bond with Charles, the future king, also carried formal protection against being quietly excluded again. The family had not escaped pain, but had finally chosen honesty over silence. Charles gathered the original proposal, tore it once through the center, and placed the pieces beside the new agreement. Camilla watched without resistance. William signed first, and followed the king completed it. Princess and stunned Buckingham Palace with a single word, but that word did not weaken the crown. It restored its boundaries, reunited its future with its present, and reminded everyone inside the palace that duty without courage is merely obedience, and courage was exactly what the monarchy needed.